There are those who oppose identifying a time frame for our transition to Afghan responsibility. Indeed, some call for a more dramatic and open-ended escalation of our war effort, one that would commit us to a nation-building project of up to a decade. I reject this course because it sets goals that are beyond what can be achieved at a reasonable cost and what we need to achieve to secure our interests.
President Obama tonight speaking at West Point in the second major Afghanistan speech of his presidency, which also announced the second major new commitment of U.S. troops to that war. Our guest for the interview tonight is John Noggle, who retired as a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army after 20 years as an armor officer. He served in the first Gulf War and in Operation Iraqi Freedom, where, among other things, he fought in Al-Anbar province during the very difficult year of 2004. In his spare time, he earned a doctorate from Oxford. He taught national security studies at West Point and Georgetown. He helped write the U.S. military's counterinsurgency field manual, and he became sort of a household name among many earnest civilians who have tried to understand this whole counterinsurgency concept that the smartest military minds in the country, some of the smartest minds in the country, period, keep telling us justifies really, 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 really long wars. Joining us now is John Noggle. He's now president of the Center for a New American Security. John, thanks very much for coming back on the show. It's nice to see you.
It's good to be back, Rachel.
We last spoke around the time of the last big Afghanistan speech by this president in March. Is tonight's announcement a continuation in strategy, or has there been a real turn in the road here?
No, I think that this is very much a continuation of the policy the president announced in March in the White House. What's happened since then, there's been a deterioration of the situation on the ground. The Taliban is growing stronger. There's great concern that the Karzai government has not stepped up to the plate to date. And so the president really had a decision to make, and I think made the decision and made a pretty good case in support of that decision pretty strongly tonight.
Why didn't the addition of 21,000 more troops in March make the security situation better in Afghanistan?
What those 21,000 troops that the president sent in March allowed to happen was create a bigger bubble of security, in particular in Helmand province in the south of Afghanistan. But it was not enough troops to secure all of the population centers, nor to build the Afghan security forces that are ultimately going to allow the United States to withdraw from Afghanistan, leaving behind a secure and a stable state. So what the president has done tonight is sent another 30,000 troops, which are going to be used to secure Kandahar, the very important city in the south where the Taliban originated, and to also provide more troops to further increase the size of the Afghan army and the Afghan police force.
I feel like I understand the argument that there aren't enough American troops to provide enough security in Afghanistan, but I still don't understand why the increase in troops, a really significant increase in troops that we saw earlier this year, coincided with, as you described it, the Taliban regaining momentum and the Taliban sort of regaining, I don't know if I can say the upper hand, but at least a pretty strong hand in this fight.
The Taliban was gaining strength regardless of whether additional American troops were sent or not. And what we're seeing really is the fruit of years of neglect of Afghanistan. The chart you showed is enormously instructive. We have neglected Afghanistan in terms of civilian reconstruction, economic development, as well as troops on the ground. And that has allowed the Taliban to get stronger and stronger, so that wave has been growing. What the troops the president sent in March did was blunt that growth, minimize that growth, but we haven't had enough resources on the ground, civilian or military, to really push it back. And that's what the president announced tonight. That's what he intends to do over the next 18 months.
It seems like the other major headline tonight, in addition to the troop numbers, is this, it's not exactly a timeline, but it is at least an announcement of when we'll start to draw down troops. And it made me want to ask you if counterinsurgency by its nature is open-ended. Does that statement that we're going to start to withdraw troops in 2011 mean that we're no longer doing counterinsurgency in some ways?
What that announcement of July 2011, summer 2011, really transition date. So by that point, about 18 months from now, in the most secure places in Afghanistan, where the Afghan security forces, the Afghan government is most capable, we hope to start handing responsibility off to the Afghan forces to take the lead there. that will start to allow some drawdown of American forces. But I think that that's a lot of things have to happen for that timeline to work out. It's possible that that's going to happen, but I don't think we can bank on it. And it is also, I think, not a sign that there's going to be a precipitous drawdown of American forces. I see this being a very gradual glide path.
John, as a veteran yourself and as somebody who has articulated essentially what you just demonstrated there with your hand, the idea that there is going to be a very soft glide down if there is a drawdown of troops, somebody who's thought a lot about what it means to commit a lot of Americans for a lot of time, I have to ask whether or not the promise, or at least the hope expressed by the Secretary of Defense this January, that dwell time could be increased, that American troops would start getting 2 years at home between deployments, is now out the window. I'm really worried about the number of troops that we've sent for 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 deployments, and I'm worried that those dwell time promises are going out the window with this promise that we'll be there for so much longer in so many numbers.
I think all Americans should be concerned about the strain we're putting on our ground forces. I thought it was very appropriate that the President spoke at West Point to an audience of young people who joined up in a time of war, who committed themselves to serve their country, knowing that they're likely to serve under fire, and a lot of whom are going to be serving in Afghanistan a year from now. So the American military is under stress. We're going to have to watch very carefully that stress, and we may have to increase the size of the Army in order to make this happen. The good news is that's a quick way to reduce unemployment in this country.
Will you argue for you're an influential guy, not only as Center for New American Security, but also because of your own accomplishments in this field in so many different ways. Will you argue for holding on to the 2-year hope for dwell time for the sake of the troops and their families?
Absolutely. I think that's the minimum we owe our all-volunteer force. They've done a great deal for us. I don't see any reason to limit the growth of the military. Now, as we draw down in Iraq over the course of 2010, that's going to help relieve some of the strain. But this is something we're going to have to continue to watch closely, and I think an increase in the size of the ground forces is still something that we have to think about as we continue to fight this very long war against the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and Al-Qaeda in Iraq.
John Nagl, President of the Center for New American Security. It's a real pleasure to have you on the show, John. Thank you for your time tonight.
My pleasure.